A century before the first electronic computer was built, the daughter of England's most famous poet wrote the first computer program. She was 27 years old. The machine she wrote it for did not exist. It would never be built in her lifetime, and the program itself would not be executed for more than 100 years. Her name was Ada Lovelace, and the story of how she saw something nobody else could see is one of the strangest in the history of ideas.
Ada was born in 1815, the only legitimate child of Lord Byron, the most celebrated poet in England. Her parents' marriage lasted barely a year. Byron left England forever when Ada was 5 weeks old. He died when she was 8. She never knew him. Her mother, Anne Isabella Milbank, was a mathematician herself. Byron had called her the Princess of Parallelograms. Terrified that Ada had inherited her father's volatile, romantic nature, Lady Byron steered her daughter hard toward mathematics and logic. From the age of 4, Ada was tutored in science and math, a course of study almost unheard of for a girl in 19th century England. It was, her mother believed, the antidote to poetry. And it was through this education that Ada found her way to a man who was trying to build a machine that could think.
In 1833, at the age of 17, Ada met Charles Babbage. Babbage was a mathematician and inventor who had designed a calculating machine called the difference engine, but he had a much bigger idea. He called it the Analytical Engine. It was designed to be a general-purpose mechanical computer. It had a processor, memory, and input via punched cards, borrowed from the Jacquard loom, a machine that wove intricate patterns in fabric. Babbage imagined the machine that could calculate any mathematical function, but Ada saw something more.
In 1842, an Italian engineer named Luigi Menabrea published a paper in French describing Babbage's analytical engine. Babbage asked Ada to translate it into English. She did. But she didn't just translate. She added 7 extensive notes, labeled A through G, that tripled the length of the original paper. They were published in 1843 in a scientific journal. She signed them only with her initials, A.A.L., Augusta Ada Lovelace. The notes were not a summary. They were an expansion. She was describing what the machine could do, not just how it worked. And in the final note, Note G, she did something that had never been done before.
She wrote a step-by-step method for the analytical engine to calculate a sequence of numbers called the Bernoulli numbers. It was not a formula. It was a set of instructions, a sequence of operations that a machine would follow, step by step, to produce a result. In other words, it was a program, the first published computer program in history. Babbage had written earlier programs, but they were simpler, never published, and lacked the detailed sequencing. Ada's Note G was the first time anyone had laid out, in complete detail, how a machine could be instructed to solve a complex problem. The analytical engine was never built. The program was never run in her lifetime. When modern researchers finally tested it, they found a bug. 2 variables had been swapped in a division operation. She had also caught a mistake in Babbage's own math and sent it back to him for correction. She was debugging before debugging existed.
But the program wasn't her most important contribution. In her notes, Ada described something that even Babbage hadn't fully grasped. She said the analytical engine could act on, in her words, other things besides number. It could manipulate symbols, letters, musical notes. She wrote that the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity. She said the analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns just as the Jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves. This was the critical insight. She wasn't just describing a calculator. She was describing a computer. The idea that a machine could operate on any system of symbols according to rules, that numbers could represent anything, that computation was not the same as calculation. This was the idea that would, a century later, become the foundation of modern computing.
Not everyone agrees on Ada's role. Some historians point out that Babbage designed the machine, suggested the examples, and provided the mathematical formulas. Ada translated and annotated, but how much was original? The honest answer is complicated. Babbage provided the formulas for the Bernoulli numbers. Ada converted them into a step-by-step table of instructions for the machine. She chose which examples to include. She wrote the notes. She spotted the bug. And she was the one who saw beyond calculation to computation. A 2020 paper in the journal Patterns put it bluntly. The fact that the statement, Ada Lovelace was the first computer programmer, is controversial says a lot more about modern attitudes toward women in computing than it does about Lovelace's abilities or achievements. The program may have had Babbage's fingerprints on it, but the vision was hers.
Ada Lovelace died of uterine cancer in 1852. She was 36 years old, the same age her father had been when he died. She was buried next to him, at her request, in the Byron family vault. She never saw the analytical engine built. She never saw her program run. But she had seen something that nobody else in the world could see, that a machine could manipulate symbols, not just numbers, that computation was bigger than calculation, that a loom could weave ideas. She also said something that still echoes today. The machine, she wrote, has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can only do what we know how to order it to perform. A century later, Alan Turing would call this Lady Lovelace's objection and ask whether she was right. Can a machine think? Can it create? We're still arguing about that. But one thing isn't in dispute. 100 years before the first electronic computer, a woman in Victorian England saw it coming. I'm Hidden Mechanics. If this made you think, subscribe. There are more invisible forces shaping your world, and most of them you'll never see coming.